So I think we will dive in and get started. I'm super excited for this panel. I think this is one of the most interesting topics and areas in life sciences right now. And we have a pretty impressive set of folks with different backgrounds and experiences who I'm really excited to hear from today. Why don't we start just with really quick introductions? Again, panel, please keep these really brief. Everyone has your bios and you all have really impressive resumes, and I think we just want to refresh people on kind of where you're coming from. Myself, I'm Drew Volpe. I'm managing partner of First Star Ventures. We're an early stage fund that focuses on deep technology and data, machine learning, and decentralization. Before this, I had a 10+ year career as an operator and co-founder and CTO of a few different companies around data, machine learning, and large-scale database systems.
Hello, my name is Enki. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I am the managing director of an early-stage venture fund based out of New York City called Architect Ventures. We invest in early-stage companies that specialize in application of frontier technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, neural tech, brain-machine interfaces, and so on. Application of those to solutions in healthcare and medicine. We specialize in backing teams that have very technical expertise, deep technical expertise. So all of our portfolio companies' founders either have a PhD, MD, or a master's degree and are domain experts in their spaces. Before this, I used to do healthcare investing across biotech and healthcare for 10 years.
I'm Gian. I work for a fund called Activate Venture Partners. We're an early stage venture fund located in New York. We kind of focus on enterprise SaaS. We have a pretty deep healthcare technology practice. We were the first investors in Medidata, which is a $4 billion public company. We were the first investors in Tabula Rasa, which is, I think, an over $1 billion public company now. We were the first investors in Shift Analytics, which is sold for a couple $100 million, all healthcare technology. Access Health was sold for $1 billion. So we kind of span the whole healthcare spectrum. We look anywhere from drug discovery technology to the marketing side of healthcare. So you can think of it like IQVIAs of the world or IQVIAs for and I've worked in a combination of finance and derivatives trading, a healthcare tech startup, angel investing, and now here.
Hi everyone, my name is Izan. I am with a firm called 11.2 Capital. 11.2 kilometer per second is the escape velocity from Earth, so we invest in breakthrough technologies. All of us are technical at the firm. We all nerds, read papers on a weekly basis. The thesis in healthcare for us is that we invest in the intersection of data and healthcare life sciences. So anything that aggregate, apply, or analyze either molecular or clinical data across tools, diagnostics, as well as therapeutics we look at. And we currently have about 10 companies in that space, ranging from computational therapeutics to synthetic biology, as well as workflow tools that automate drug discovery. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, same here. Very excited to be here. My name is Ronald Doornbos. I work at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. PhD in microbiology, then did a neuroscience postdoc at Harvard for about 6 years, mostly Parkinson's research. And then about 10 years ago, I moved to industry, mostly consulting, and that was also where I got really more involved with AI, digital health, machine learning, and helped several big pharma companies with implementation of such technologies and also scouting for what's out there, what's real, what's not real. And then about a year ago I joined Takeda Pharmaceuticals, the Materials Innovation Group, that is more focused on drug delivery technologies that we can use in the core areas of neuroscience, oncology, and gastroenterology. But I'm also part of the digital strategy team, and there we look at technologies like big data, how we can use it, what kind of analytics we can use around clinical trials, around process development, anything basically that can benefit also those core areas, and that's it.
Great. Just so we have an understanding of the audience, could I have a show of hands? Who in here is a founder of a startup? And And of those folks, how many are likely to want to get venture funding at some point or already have? How many folks work for industry, so for a large industry company? And how about folks from research and academia? Okay, cool. So it sounds like it's a pretty mixed group. So we'll keep that in mind and try to focus on a bunch of different topics around big data in healthcare. I guess first and foremost, this is a new space and things are changing really fast. In particular, the confluence of having a ton more data than we've ever had before, whether it's having EMR systems or health data exchanges or new kinds of sensors, having much better algorithms for processing data at scale, whether it's things like neural nets that perform much better when you get to millions or even billions of data points. And thirdly, having much better computation. So, being able to use GPUs, being able to use fast ASICs and all of the magical hardware that companies like NVIDIA and Google keep giving us has meant that we can do a ton more with data than ever before. And this landscape really has changed. So, is interested in getting the panel's take on what's changed in the last, say, 5 years that you can do new things in life sciences that you couldn't before. I mean, maybe starting with NJ, what have you seen that enables us to do things we couldn't do before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the entire drug discovery method has shifted a bit over the last 10 years because the thing is the low-hanging fruit of small molecules and biologics for some of the more straightforward type of disorders is already taken. So now we're left with these systemic disorders like cancer and neurodegenerative disorders, which need more than the classical path of, let's say a blocker of X transcription factor in X pathway. And so the pharma has now realized this, and they're very interested in integrating data to better inform the drug discovery process. And we saw this, and we've seen it, especially in the last year, which is a very exciting, with a few very exciting events, such as, for example, Roche's purchase of Foundation Medicine and then Flatiron Health. That was purely a data play. Before that, the JSK partnership with 23andMe in terms of their genomic data. So the landscape has definitely fundamentally changed. And we see now the pharma and the biotech are interested, and right now the big data as a startup is highly fundable. Like we see there's significant capital from the investor side going into the space. Yeah, my first AI investment in big data was in 2011, and all my colleagues at the time thought it was a pet science project. That is not the case anymore, and we see this, and so it's a pretty exciting time to be. Yeah.
Ronald, maybe from your vantage point, at a pharma company, can you talk a little bit about the ways you see data changing how you guys at Takeda do what you do today, and then also going forward in the future?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a cliche to say that, but obviously, there's much more data available, and that's really because of the Internet of Things. There's many more devices, also the acceptance in the public. There's many more people, even older people. I was just earlier today giving an example of a lady in her 80s that was asked to use a smartphone to be able to track her condition in a digital way, and really that lady embracing it, even at her old age. Where you see that there's much more acceptance, so there's much more possibility to also capture data, and that's really very fast developing and becoming much more, and not only active variables, but also a lot of passive data tracking. We have devices that you can, for example, install in house. There was an earlier today presentation at another conference about a device developed at MIT where they can follow patients, Parkinson's patients, their movement inside a house or a building. The device is just placed on the wall. The patient doesn't notice anything different. It's just based on Wi-Fi signals, and it's truly remarkable. And it catches a tremendous amount of data. So those kind of developments give us much more leverage to really do something with all the data, and that was not possible before. And I see many more of those kind of things developing in the near future.
So all these technologies allow a lot of new opportunities. I guess one question for the panel is, what are the areas you think are really fruitful for investment? Where are you looking for new kinds of startups and new opportunities? Maybe to throw it to you, Gian.
I guess you kind of have to segment things in a pretty, in a significant way when you think about pharma, or just healthcare in general. In the pharma vertical, we'll segment it into, there are definitely solutions for conditions that are non-oncology related that are pretty interesting because, frankly, the oncology market has started to get a little bit saturated in terms of data solutions and data vendors. Flatiron is obviously the big one, but like there's Coda and like 5 others. We've seen the rise of maybe 3 or 4 startups in the rare disease space that are doing rare disease data, but there are many more indications where data could be pretty useful. We're starting to see interesting stuff in like Bayesian analysis for clinical trials, whether that's dose response models, or as you move a little bit further downstream to like phase 2 adaptive clinical trials, single-arm clinical trials with specific biomarkers and things like that. And then, frankly, another place where you're starting to see really intelligent data usage is on the marketing side of things, because that really does drive the profits of the big pharma companies more than anything else. So when we think about any opportunity, especially as an investment opportunity, we kind of try to segment it into the customer need, and the customer need for pharma really depends on what stage of clinical trial, what stage of the drug discovery, drug development process you're talking about, or marketing. That's how we think about it.
How about you, Izan? What areas are you looking for new opportunities?
Yeah, sure. So we're very bullish on what we call computational therapeutics, something that I mentioned previously. We are an investor in a company called Deep Genomics, which is a Toronto-based company that leverages AI to design oligonucleotides for gene therapy. We also have another company called Ronza in the Bay Area. What I'm excited about this space is twofold. One is always looking for new computational methods that can leverage the data you have to get new insights, right? So anything that goes beyond machine learning, typical machine learning, into perhaps generative adversary network that generate novel molecular design for small molecules to a novel computation that can search the entire, let's say 10 to the 20 peptide space for a timer to find the attribute that you want based on a limited set of training data. So these go beyond the traditional linear regression as it comes to machine learning. And then secondly, very bullish on looking at novel data types. I think the genomics and even the transcriptomics have come and gone, or they're still kind of last generation in my opinion. And so we're looking for novel opportunities, perhaps leveraging your microbiome data for drug discovery, or even your epigenetics, for example, using novel tools like ATAC-seq or CRISPR technologies.
I think also, if I just may hook onto that, a big development through the last 5 years is really like the progress in natural language processing, that there's so much involvement there that it's now possible to have AI read articles, see doctors' notes, understand electronic health records, extract data from that and do something useful with it. And it's still in its infancy, but you already see big uses of that. Like there was an example, I don't really like to mention IBM Watson, but I'm going to do it anyway. It just shows what's possible. So there was this patient in Tokyo that had some kind of leukemia, and they did not know what it was. Spent weeks on this patient to identify, diagnose her. Couldn't figure it out. Got IBM Watson involved. IBM Watson, within 10 minutes, went through, I believe, 20 million documents, papers basically. And within that 10 minutes came up with a diagnosis and a therapeutic program for that lady. So that was in 10 minutes. So it shows what's possible. And there's many companies out there that are working on these kind of methods with natural language processing to develop this to such a level that they can use spoken language, they can use text in any format. And that's only at the beginning stages, but it will be really developing to a levels that we cannot even foresee yet what it will involve and make possible.
It's an exciting time.
Mm.
Companies that leverage these technologies, typically have different business models than other kinds of companies, than either software companies or life sciences and therapeutics companies, which traditionally have either sold licensed software or built new therapeutics that they sell to market. Wondering what people's thoughts are on how startups should think about creating their business models in this space, where you're using a lot of data, adding algorithms to it, and trying to figure out how to monetize that and create a strong competitive moat. Izan, you're nodding a lot. Maybe I'll throw it to you.
I was just thinking because what Ronald was saying about NLP, and then I was going to comment on the business model there. I feel that it's hard to sell to, using that technology to sell to both either providers or pharma companies, because from what I heard, and please validate if I'm wrong, the research on pharma companies are really stingy and they don't want to pay versus the commercial arm.
Well, stingy and also from my earlier experience with other pharma companies, really conservative.
Very conservative, rather use open source tools for those type of things rather than buying new technologies. And given that you have limited set of biotech pharma companies in the US or in the world, right, your contract size is really limited by that factor, and your addressable market is smaller. On the provider side, I've seen companies that are leveraging NLP for treatment diagnosis on that front, but then that's also really tough because the long sales cycle to hospitals, as well as the NLP technology, while it's new, it's other people are working on it at the same time. It's really hard to get that traction that you need to kind of grab the landscape, grab the market before other entrants come in, because of long sales cycle and the defensibility of the tech. So for me, like those type of technology is a little bit difficult. Depends. I guess business model wise depends on your audience really, and how much value you can really extract, and the willingness to pay from those audience.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes easier also, with some use cases where you really see the benefit, because there's of course now not that many examples where you can really see a huge benefit. I think that would be able to convince some of the more stingy and conservative scientists in, for example, big pharma, to also have a closer look at it and get on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually interjecting here, because I see a lot of companies that have a certain amount of data trying to sell to the pharma and coming up with conclusions that sometimes is a bit difficult. But the thing is, it depends on how actionable and what type of data this company has, and how useful that is to a particular process in either the drug discovery side or whatever side that they're trying to sell it to. And I think this is something that it is indeed a very exciting time for big data, but it is fundamental to have to understand what type of data there is, how well structured that is, how well annotated it is, what is, if it is proprietary. All this will make like a significant difference for a startup in terms of the sales cycle and how well they attract the buyer, which in this case will be pharma.
And I think, in addition to that, like a lot of people, when they talk about big data, think of volume, and volume definitely is an important thing, because that's what big data is all about. But another thing, the speed with which you can access and really make the data useful, that's another very important thing. And then how useful is actually the data, so the fidelity of the data, not even so much the quality of the data, because quality is one thing, but if it's not really useful for what you want to do, I mean, you can have high quality data about somebody's, let's think of something, the length of somebody's finger, and try to relate that to whether somebody will get Parkinson's or not. It can be very highly accurate and very highly quality data, but it's not useful, of course, in any way. So you need to have data that has high fidelity, that is useful for the purpose that you want to use it for. If you have something like that, a small data set with high quality and easily accessible, easily translatable to its use, can be much more valuable than a huge volume of data that is not easily accessible and not useful.
So to talk a little bit about kind of those early founding days of once you have some data or some new algorithms that you're applying to a problem, and then kind of want to go start a company. I think like most of the panelists here, a majority of our founders have PhDs. I also, in a previous life, co-founded a company with 2 newly minted MIT PhDs. And I've definitely gone through helping people transition from academia to the startup world, which are really different worlds in terms of how collaborative they are, risk profiles, all sorts of different things. So wanted to touch on that topic a little bit. NK, I know you have some experience with this, and we would love to hear your take on having seen a bunch of different founders transition from research to actually creating a new venture.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so it's just pointing out the differences between the science world and the business world. One of the jokes is that as a scientist, we speak only when we know that we're 99% right, and as a business person, we speak when we're about 49 to 51% right, and then we're domain experts all of a sudden. So the worlds are definitely fundamentally different, but I think bridging them is actually very easily, because for a founder that has a PhD training, the training is in terms of, besides the domain expertise of the X or Y field, the training is to look at the big picture. The training involves the strategic thinking. So it involves quite a few of the parts that one can take and then apply to the business side. Also comfort with the numbers, which is finance. But I think just practically speaking, for a lot of PhD founders, it would be great to initially take advantage of the particular university's innovation programs or accelerators. Some of the top universities have fantastic accelerators where they can learn firsthand and be part of the process, and also to reach out to particular VCs before they're raising, before they're fundraising. Just have the conversations about what they're looking for. What do they want to see in that first pitch? How do they want to structure the pitch? I think that's fundamentally important. And I think just by having these conversations, then they would be able to avoid, I think, two of the major pitfalls that we see with all with quite a few of the PhD/technical founder started companies. The first one is cap table issues. We see significant amount of cap table issues, and by this I mean founders or advisors, scientific advisors that have a significant amount of equity on the cap table, but they're not involved with the company going forward. The cap table of a science company, very often it looks what it reflects on the past of the company and not on the future of the company. And we have a say that the cap table of a company should always reflect value creation of the future. And that's a major one. And the second major one is the team is super product oriented, and they think that because the product works, it's going to sell itself. It never does.
I agree with that. Yeah,
I think someone can expand on that.
Yeah, all the founders that we work with, technical background, they're now willing to invest in the commercial side, even before talking to customers, for example, investing in market research, which are super important.
I would echo both of those. I think the cap table and in general company setup is really important and can be not given its due. And if you mess up things like the cap table and original legal agreements, it can be really hard to unwind those. So definitely make sure you have proper equity agreements, make sure they involve vesting, make sure you have a good law firm involved in setting up the initial company. Part of this should be done in cooperation with some advisors that have some experience and have been through it. And secondly, definitely would echo, sales and distribution is something that I think it's hard to get scientists to really appreciate the value of. But it's half or more of what makes a company successful. But it is something that you should think about from day zero in a company's trajectory. How about other panelists? What are some of the biggest mistakes, maybe Gian, you've seen scientists make as they start kind of their first ventures?
To be perfectly candid, so I guess when you have a scientist who's starting a computational drug discovery startup that looks basically like a therapeutics business. And that's probably been the lesson that the market has learned over the last 6 years. We don't have great backgrounds in therapeutics, so I can't give a lot of advice other than go talk to people who invest in therapeutics businesses and figure out whether the mechanisms of actions and those types of things are actually useful. Talk to Atlas, and you're in Boston, talk to all these other smart people like Third Rock. in the technology side, when companies use buzzwords like big data, the reality has been that I can't think of a major, like, maybe I'm missing one, like a major company, an iconic company in healthcare technology, that's come out of research. Because you really need to understand the commercial problem, as everybody's kind of talked about, and the commercial problem comes out of being in that commercial world. So we've tended to gravitate towards people who understand the commercial problem, either because they worked in pharma or because the commercial problem sits in research, and they understand the problem from that perspective. So it's totally about commercialization in healthcare. Like, the challenges in healthcare tend to relate to sales cycle, and they tend to relate to the fact that the customer doesn't actually need the product you're creating enough to overcome the sales cycle inertia. So those don't tend to be problems researchers can solve. So I would suggest if you're a researcher who thinks they have a really great innovation outside of computational drug discovery, you find a really sales-oriented co-founder. That's the solution for me.
So let's say I've done that. I'm a researcher, I found an amazing co-founder who's a great complement and understands the sales side really well. I want to go start fundraising, start getting fundraising for my company. What's the best way to initiate a dialogue with everyone on the panel? Maybe starting with you, Yi-Zhen. If I have a really fantastic idea, what's the best way to start interacting with 11.2 and showing you that I'm one of the startups that's going to break escape velocity?
I mean, we're super approachable. I mean, usually if you email me, I'll respond if it's like within thesis. I think most of us are like that, right? That we just want to be nice and friendly to entrepreneurs and making sure we see those opportunities. I think what's going to get us over the hump, and then every investor is going to be different on this panel. We all look for different things because of our background and experience and whatnot. For us, we really like to have that kind of unique solution or technology that no one else can build in the market. So less so of a me too or follower, but something that's unique and to what you have. And then the team is super important at an earlier stage. I think it speaks across all the investors on this panel. That team is important as well as the addressable market. But we do spend a tremendous amount of time doing technology due diligence. As we feel that that's just like what we're interested and excited about.
So just to echo that, I think one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand is our whole job is to meet with entrepreneurs. So we're way more approachable than I think most people realize. And cold emails or lukewarm, not that warm introductions actually do work.
Yeah.
However, I will say, as someone who gets, 50 plus emails a day, I also think there's a bit of an art to that. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So, when you say someone can just email you, I'm sure there are emails you actually read all of and ones you probably don't get all that far. When you do that initial email, I send you that cold email with my idea. What are you really looking for there? What would you recommend people put in that?
So I get a lot of cold emails from people that founding companies that are not in healthcare, and they're just like, please just research about who does healthcare investments at the firm that you're reaching out to, and then maybe look at some of their past investment to see if like it's actually you're a good fit for this particular firm. Read some of the blogs they publish or something like that. Just do a little bit of homework. Like, oh yeah, hello so and so. I read that you invested in this space because you invested in this and this. We do this and this. Feel like you maybe be a good fit, and here's what we do. That's just maybe just do. I mean, a little bit of homework goes a long way.
And how about you, Ronald? When people ping you, what do you look for? How approachable are you? What's
I'm very
the
approachable, and unfortunately not as responding as I would like because of just you said 50 plus. For me, it's more like between 100 and 300. Not every day, but especially after conferences, it's really crazy. So it's just physically impossible to get back to all emails. But I pick out those ones that and that's really like scanning the subject line so often. So you start with a good subject line, I would say. And then also in the email, keep it short, because my role is more to pass it on to other people within the organization. Well, Takeda, 30,000 plus people, so it's quite a lot of people. have quite an extensive network in the organization, so I kind of know when I see something of interest who to ping into. I also know that those people are extremely busy, have already a ton on their plate, and to get them to champion something that comes from outside, it really needs to be something good, and they need to be able to read it like in less than 30 seconds. And that means if I get a slide deck for something 70 pages long, that's no way that that's going to make it to anybody in the organization because it's just too long. And I don't have time to summarize it myself. So what I often tell people is, just send me an executive summary or maybe a slide deck of 4 or 5 slides at the most, and then I'll pass it on. And then when there's a response from those people in the organization that are interested, we can move it forward, we can ask for more information, and then maybe set up a presentation or something like that, get a CDA in place, and then move it to more the business level to really discuss how to move forward. I also want to say that a lot of people give up after the first cold email. Don't do that. I mean, you also don't want to send 100 emails, don't get me wrong, don't overwhelm my inbox, it's already kind of getting crazy. But it's not bad to, after 1 month you don't hear anything, just to ping again. To give an example, I meet many people today and I tell them, well, for the next month I will be traveling most of the month. So get back to me end of September if you didn't hear anything. And then I'll pick it up and I try to respond to you. And it's just the reality. And we are limited with, well, we're not limited with resources. I can't say that when we have 30,000 people. I'm limited with my resources. So it's just how it is. And I would like to have that being different because I also feel
I think that's a great tip.
tip.
And I will say myself, you know, I'm going to get deluged with emails tonight and tomorrow, and so a number of folks I've met have actually said, like, can you email me in 2 weeks? Like, I'm much more likely to respond if you ping me a week or 2 from now, because I just know the next 24 hours, my inbox is going to be crazy.
Yeah, but really the reminding people, it's not a bad thing, so just do that. It doesn't mean when you don't get a response that people are not interested. It might just be that they are too busy.
And I think this is maybe a good point to talk about the next step, which would be the first pitch, in terms of how to effectively have that first 30-minute conversation with an investor, because that is something that we come across quite often. And in terms of, so basically there's like 2 versions of it that it fundamentally doesn't go very well. And the first version is when there's a significant amount of the talk is about the science, and there is not a lot of discussion about the business as a whole. And the second is usually when there's a lot of discussion about the business and the commercialization, but there is no discussion about the science. And it's like, well, does it work? Well, maybe. So that I think it's important to touch on both of these and integrate them well. And basically, a lot of founders think that the first meeting they should tell the investor like everything. No, like the entire point of the first meeting is so that they get a second meeting. So in the first meeting, what's important to know is fundamentally what is the technology? Does it work, or does it have a potential to work? What is the business model? How does it make revenue? How soon it will make revenue? And then why are you the person to run this company? And that's it. And if you have like a positive response or well-prepared response on these 3 aspects, then you can get into the second meeting in which you can talk a lot more about particular aspects of the pitch. Because I think for most of us, the pitches are usually like the first intro pitch is 20 to 30 minutes. And I feel quite often terrible that I didn't get to learn more about the company because the conversation was like skewed toward one aspect, and there's so many times that you can interrupt the person.
That's a great point. I mean, we're really bandwidth constraints. In that first meeting, you want to establish credibility both on the commercial and the science side as quickly as possible, and really focus on not getting a check, but getting that dialogue to continue. I guess to step back and talk a little bit about that, why don't we talk a little bit about the process of each of our venture funds? Because it is, it's a process. It's not like getting a bank loan. You don't just come in and walk out with a check. That happens in rare occasions, but almost always it's going to be an ongoing dialogue where we learn more about the team and the technology and the commercialization efforts. Yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about, if I'm an entrepreneur pitching Activate, what's kind of the process from zero to term sheet to actually wire to my bank account?
Sure. Well, hopefully you won't send a cold email and you'll get an introduction from somebody I know or somebody one of us knows. We tend to do a 30-minute call, maybe 45 minutes max, to figure out whether, well, actually we'll ask for a deck normally first of some sort as a first vet to kind of figure out whether the company could fit us. If we think it could fit us, we'll do a 30 to 45-minute call saying, like, one of us will do it to figure out whether we like the company. We normally ask quite a bit about the team because we're very early stage investors. We're pretty much pre-seed and seed right now. So we spend some time with the founder on the call or the co-founders on the call. If that goes well, we ask the co-founders to come in. They come in, they give us an amazing pitch, hopefully. If they don't, we politely reject them and say thank you for your time. If we get an amazing pitch, we kind of all noodle. We have a weekly meeting. Most venture funds will have a weekly meeting on Mondays from like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. often. So it's a long meeting, but people will pitch during that day as well. And then we'll noodle over it together and kind of decide what the ones that we kind of, as a group, liked or somebody in the group really wanted to take forward, and they'll take it forward. And at that point, it really just depends on what the key risks are that we want mitigated or what the core thesis is about the company. So it becomes incredibly variable. Like you could have deals where you do a week of diligence and then you offer a term sheet. And I'm not going to go too much past the term sheet because that's a whole nother question. But and then there are deals where you have to do really significant diligence, whether it's technical diligence or background checks on the team or just trying to understand the market. So at that point, it kind of breaks into us trying to get a really great grasp of the business and form a thesis about why this business could outperform. And when we say outperform, it really means on a cash-on-cash basis, if we put in $1 million, we have to expect to make 10 because most of them are going to be 0. And if you can't make 10, it's just not an attractive company to invest in. So that's kind of what we're trying to triangulate at, and we do it in a lot of different ways, but it's mostly technical diligence, team diligence, trying to understand the space, sometimes talking to customers depending on what type of business you have.
Great. Earlier we talked a little bit about kind of the changes of the last 5 years and areas I think we're all interested in investing in now. Maybe talk a little bit about the future. 5 years from now, how do we think data has really transformed life sciences? What are the big areas you think will be significantly different and you'll be investing in 5 years from now? Ronald, maybe you.
Well, rather not. 5 years is a long way into the future, especially in this field of AI and data. I was earlier giving a talk and I was finding somewhere that the amount of data in 2025 will be, I think it was 163 zettabytes, which is the entire Netflix catalog watched 489 million times. So there's a lot of data. And it's increasingly difficult to forecast what will happen even 2-3 years from now, which is why also most consulting companies are only predicting something as far into the future as 2 years from now. So yeah, I see huge developments in wearables, non-wearables, and collecting data, and what we were talking about earlier, natural language processing developed to such a standard that we can even use things like Alexa and Siri and all those things to just capture things that we are now not even thinking about. So those developments will go on, but yeah, to look 5 years into the future is impossible.
I think you're gonna, one of the key levers here is going to be whatever the FDA allows you to do. So if the FDA becomes more amenable to single-arm trials or more amenable to certain statistical techniques, then that will dictate what happens in the market. Because frankly, drugs need to get approved, or they don't really count for anything. So one of the things I think everybody should be kind of thinking about is where the FDA is moving, because that's kind of where the market will move. On the computational biology side, or in particular like computational drug discovery, we might have a non-consensus view here relative to some of the other people, but like I think that market's almost 95% bullshit. Like it's not a good market to invest in. The greatest therapeutics companies of the last 10 to 20 years have all been about novel biology. Right? Like the big wins of today are PD-1, PD-L1, and maybe you could argue that like checkpoint inhibitors will, like you can find new checkpoint inhibitors, but still it's about novel biology. Or if you think about CAR T and all this T cell stuff, it's not really like a data problem. It's more a problem of biology. So there will definitely be valuable companies formed in the data space, I think, in here, but it's probably not as much as the capital that's going in. So I would actually caution people away from pushing too much there.
I would echo that, and just as a machine learning person, I mean, having built speech recognition systems, when I started first reading and understanding drug discovery and biology, I was just amazed people were trying to apply deep learning to it. Because to build a speech recognition system, you typically are dealing with about 20,000 hours of raw speech and a corpus of about 1 billion words. That's normally what you kind of is table stakes to make a decent speech recognition engine. And if you think about the computer science problem of speech recognition, it's really easy. We only say about 50,000, 100,000 different words, and it's very predictable if I say 2 words what the third word is. If you move into the domain of biology, it's probably 4 or 5 orders of magnitude more complex, and just the perplexity of what you need to predict. In addition, the data we have is so much smaller. Like in medicine, you just almost never have billions of data points in any dimension. So just as a computer scientist, I'm also really skeptical of most of the we're going to solve drug discovery with AI companies.
I mean, I feel like I'm almost compelled to have a response. I think that's true to a certain extent. I do think that there is an opportunity where AI and computational platforms can be used to discover novel biology, given the data that we have. I agree that purely applying AI and computational techniques may not be that helpful, but in that process, you could discover novel insights that couldn't be otherwise found before. The NLP method that Ronald was saying, creating a knowledge map of different connections of disease and targets, as well as indications, or repurposing drugs, identifying patterns that researchers may not know before, is very valuable for repurposing drugs that they already have in the pipeline. Or looking at, comparing disease versus healthy of different omics data, right, lets you discover perhaps novel targets as well from that basic comparison of what's more upstream or downstream, what's the difference between the two. I think there's some value there still to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. Just adding on to that, I also think the algorithm, the nature of the algorithms is going to change, because I think there is going to be more advanced algorithms beyond the current neural nets or the current principles that we have in deep learning, that actually, like the fundamental architecture of this algorithm would change to potentially mimic the way that the brain works. Actually, we've seen quite a few companies in this space, and I think that will be very interesting to see how much better, potentially, these new types of algorithms will be able to handle the data sets and create more insights into the drug discovery process.
If I just may add one more thing, I think also in parallel, of course, there's the development going on in quantum computing. Earlier this year, Google came with Bristlecone, a 72-qubit quantum computer, which is quite remarkable, because already in 2015 they had a 42-qubit quantum computer, which was about 100 million times faster than the everyday laptop, which means that it could do the same amount of calculations in a day as a laptop in about 274,000 years. So that's an enormous speed up of the whole process. So you can think of when you have this big data, and now it still takes IBM Watson 10 minutes to go to 20 million records. But imagine you could do that in less than a millisecond. That would, of course, entirely change the whole dynamics of also modeling, of predicting mechanistic actions. And so I see also, if they get that to a realistic platform, which is not there yet, but it might happen in the next 5 to 10 years, then we would have really computer power that nobody has ever dealt with, never even envisioned. And that would completely change the whole arena of healthcare, of life sciences, of drug development, everything. So that's also why I think it's so difficult to predict what's happening in 5 years, since those developments are ongoing, and that will be, and Google is even predicting that they will reach quantum supremacy at the end of this year, which means that it will surpass the fastest supercomputers that we currently have on the planet.
It's an interesting space to watch. So I do want to save some time for questions for the audience. So to throw it out there, yes, ma'am.
Nice discussion. Thank you for all your insights. You've discussed mostly about drug discovery, which is the front end of healthcare. How about have you seen AI being implemented or not implemented, or at least in the early stages for clinical trials to reduce the time, because the cost of developing the drugs is in the back end a lot, which is the trials. Your insights on how?
Yeah, so first off, I take some issue with the question because I think how you measure the cost of developing a drug can depend a lot. So if you measure it by like a funnel approach, which basically means like you have this many preclinical assets, and as you go forward, then you would actually probably say most of the cost is front-loaded because you just have so many preclinical assets. But I agree if you looked at one asset that got to market, the biggest cost center would certainly be the phase 3 trial. There is some stuff going on in phase 3 trials in the space. There's basket trials. There's some single-arm stuff going on. The challenge is really that it's FDA-driven there, right? Meaning, it's basically what you can get FDA statisticians to accept in order to approve your drug. You're starting to see them be more flexible. There are working groups inside the FDA. You're starting to see the big clinical trial software companies get involved. Metadata certainly has a team in this space. But it's really it's less a function of data problems, and it's more a function of just getting the FDA slowly comfortable with what you're doing. I think Flatiron, for instance, showed some data recently about like a single-arm trial for, some drug in oncology, where they had pretty reasonable bounds and estimates on the efficacy of the drug in a single-arm trial, but it's still about, hey, does that pass muster with the FDA? Especially if it's not like some orphan indication where the FDA doesn't have some like real compulsion to move something forward. So we definitely see some stuff there. It tends to be either companies selling data or the incumbents, because the statistical techniques you're using aren't hyper complex. It's not like you need some sort of new type of convolutional neural network or some type of new neural network. It's more about convincing the key participants in the decision to approve a drug, and then also getting the data sets that allow you to put better bounds or estimates on the efficacy of the drug.
Maybe just a couple of examples to add on that real quick. One is I spoke to a few companies that are simulating clinical trials using using simulated patients rather than real patients in their either control or experimental trial, which is pretty cool, right? When you think of it, instead of using patients as guinea pigs, maybe you can use simulated patients. But FDA is a barrier to that, and we don't know how mature when that's going to come to fruition. And then secondly, on the preclinical side, there's also opportunities. There's a company that applies unsupervised learning to mouse behavior, so observe the psychiatric effects of drugs, so that you don't have a biased view of predicting biased way of detecting their motions, but using a camera and perhaps building these what they call kind of syllables to track these mouse movements.
Who else has a question? Yes, ma'am?
I just want to follow on the comment or the discussion around discovery, drug discovery, and just the way I think about it is there's a context that's important for a specific use case. There's the tools you have to measure that context, and then the ultimate analytical tools. So for example, when I was at Affymetrix almost 20 years ago, I worked there for several years, and it was around the time of the human genome sequencing and all of that, and all of a sudden we developed transcriptomics and could figure out why we're very different from a worm, even though we don't have that many more genes, right? And fast forward, and we have single cell technologies, epigenetics, microbiome, and the impact of all of that. So I think for every disease area or application, whether it's drug discovery or whether it's personalized medicine or whatever it might be, clinical trial development, it's going to take the best use of all of those tools that are out there, and then apply them, find the right context and use case, find the right tools to analyze it, and then analyze the data. But there's just so much out there right now that I think a lot of advances will be made on how to bring all that together. And so I don't know if you have comments on that.
Actually, we've seen in the last year a few companies that I think might be in the sort of a potential successful path on this, in which they're taking genomics data and then enriching it with the medical records, electronic medical records, and then enriching it with wearable, like Fitbit data, and they're trying to integrate all of it together. And they're sometimes trying to integrate it longitudinally and also generationally.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we're very closely watching. It's been very interesting to us. And there's like 2 particular companies in the space that I think they're going to do quite well. But I think that is one approach along the lines of what you're mentioning.
And also just say, like, the average diagnostic is not super complex. Well, that's not the most accurate statement, but like when you look at something like tumor molecular burden, or some of these other like things that people are using for whatever IO drug, to kind of figure out whether that IO drug is the right drug, it ends up not being as complex as you would have thought. Like, we've looked at a lot of companies that are like, well, we're going to use RNA sequencing to tell you what IO drug you should use, and we're going to use multiplex sequencing or whatever else. Like, and it just ends up not really adding a lot of value. So you're totally right that the context is important. It's just also about adding real predictive value for the cost that you're adding to the system. And a lot of people just like throw more data at it because we're kind of in this world right now where we've got big data. So that's the challenge we see.
So I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
I heard a lot of talk about physical health, and as the big data relates to various physical conditions. How does big data, I know there's a lot of chronic illness in this country, 80% of our healthcare goes to treat that, and I think it's some 40-some-odd percent, 46%, who have a comorbid behavioral health condition, and that's just depression and anxiety. Where's big data being applied in the field of caring for the whole patient?
Yeah, I would like to answer that, but there's definitely a lot of work going on in that field, also for things like depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, well, you name it. Where, for example, speech recognition is being used, so collecting lots of data from how people speak and correlating that to how they spoke earlier, and that can be then translated to neurological conditions. There's also initiatives to develop apps for people with depression that are also based on AI, also use big data in the background to help patients cope better with the depression and really get out of that. Those are developments that are ongoing. I wouldn't say there is anything, I only know of Pear Therapeutics that has a deal with Novartis for a schizophrenia application that schizophrenia patients can use and really see a significant improvement for these patients. How much big data there is
It is
involved
really early, but I will say I'm very bullish on digital therapeutics. You know, it's early days. However, if you think about what we can measure about people in a really lightweight, easy way, it's way more than ever before. You know, simple things like galvanic stress response. With that thing, with sensors, with watches, like you can just tell a lot more about a patient. And if you think about it, like population health and therapies are really great machine learning problems, because you can monitor the patient throughout the day, try different approaches and therapies, and then feed that back in and allow the clinician to change the plan for that particular patient. So I'm very bullish on that area.
I think this panel was like pretty focused on pharma and kind of how this affects pharma. A lot of when you move to the holistic like measure of the patient or thinking of a patient in the whole ends up moving to like the purvey of the provider systems and the payers, because they're taking that risk. Maybe one day pharma will take that risk. But there's certainly tons of risk stratification models. There's machine learning, like vocal biomarkers for depression. I invested in a company that does that. So you see a lot of this stuff, but the key customer there tends to actually be the payer or the provider system. And often it's only provider systems that take risks. So it's just a different customer base, really. for the most part, although there are some pairs in the middle.
Am I right in saying psychotropic drugs are the most prescribed drugs? I've heard that.
I believe-
There's more of those prescribed by a primary care doctor than any other classification of drug. Is that right?
I guess it would depend probably like what you're including in that class. Like, is it
Zoloft,
SSRIs,
Paxil,
but like also.
Prozac.
Yeah, then probably. But that's because we're like Prozac Nation.
Yeah, also the geography, of course, is also a huge influence again. Whether you talk about the US or Europe or, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Well, I want to really thank the panel for coming out and